Ask anyone where the first computer chip ended up, and they will say a computer. That answer is off by about 11,000 meters, because while the famous chip was still being designed, another one was already flying. It sat behind the cockpit of a fighter jet, doing maths at twice the speed of sound. It was finished more than a year before the chip your history book calls first, and almost nobody knew, because for 28 years it was a military secret. This is the story of the chip that was not allowed to exist. Start with the aeroplane, because the aeroplane is the reason the chip had to exist. In the late 60s, the American Navy was designing a new fighter, the F-14 Tomcat. It had a trick almost no aircraft had. Its wings could move. Swept back, it was built for speed. Spread wide, it could take off from a carrier deck. But that trick came with a question. Who decides the angle of the wings? Get it wrong at low speed and the jet drops. Get it wrong at high speed and it tears. The answer changes every second, with speed, with altitude, with the density of the air itself. A pilot in a dogfight has no spare hands for that arithmetic. So the Navy asked for something that did not really exist yet. A computer small enough to fly and fast enough to trust with the wings. Understand what small enough to fly meant in 1968. The computers of that time filled rooms. Cabinets, tape reels, raised floors.
The machine that guided Apollo to the moon was a marvel, and it was still a heavy box of woven wire. The Navy wanted that kind of brain squeezed into a slot behind an ejection seat. It had to read the outside air, pressure, temperature, angle, hundreds of times a second. From that, it had to work out altitude, speed, and the number that ruled everything, Mach. Then it had to move the wings, the flaps, the glove vanes, on its own, in flight. And because a wrong answer could kill the crew, it had to check its own work. The contract went to a company most people have never heard of, Garrett Air Research. A small team took the job. One of the young engineers was a man named Ray Holt. The team did not build one clever chip, they built a family of them. 6 kinds of small silicon chips working together as one 20-bit brain. The set had a name that sounds like a serial number, the MP944. Together they formed the jet's Central Air Data Computer. It was done in June of 1970, and by December it was flying in the prototype. Hold that date, because now comes the part everyone thinks they know. The chip the world celebrates as first is the Intel 4004. It arrived in November of 1971, nearly a year and a half after the Navy's chips were finished at working. And here is the detail that makes it almost funny. The famous first chip was built for a desk calculator, a 4-bit brain for adding up sums.
The secret one was a 20-bit brain, flying a fighter at the edge of its envelope. One counted receipts, the other held the wings of a war machine. So why does every textbook still start the story with the calculator chip? Because the Navy's chip was classified, and it stayed classified. Ray Holt wrote a paper about the design in 1971, the kind of paper that starts careers and ends up in museums. The military looked at it and said no, not now. Not now turned into a year turned into a decade. The paper was finally cleared for the public in 1998, 28 years after the chips first flew. By then, the world had decided who invented what, and the story had hardened. The engineers who did it first, in secret, had watched the parade from the pavement. There is still an argument about the word first, and it is a fair argument. Purists say a true microprocessor is a single chip, and the Navy's brain was a set of 6. Historians can argue about the word. The calendar is not arguing. A programmable silicon computer was flying a Navy jet before the famous chip was sold. It is worth asking why the military hid it at all. The answer is the same reason the chip existed, the wings. That computer was a fingerprint of exactly how the F-14 flew, its limits, its habits. Publish the brain, and you publish the aeroplane. The same logic has repeated ever since, and it explains something strange about technology.
The most advanced electronics of almost every decade were not on shelves. They were in weapons. Chips guided missiles before they priced groceries. Cameras rode satellites before they rode phones. What you buy in a shop is often the public version of something that flew 10 years earlier. The F-14 itself served for 3 more decades, wings still swinging, computers still deciding. The Navy retired it in 2006. Most of the crews who flew it never knew the history sitting behind their seat. There is a happy ending of a kind, and it is a small one. After the papers were declassified, the story slowly surfaced. Museums that had filed the MP944 under spare parts began moving it to the front case. Ray Holt spent his later years telling students the thing he was ordered not to say, that the chip age did not begin on a desk. It began at altitude, under secrecy, over the sea. So the next time someone tells you the first chip powered a calculator,
You can smile. The calculator came second. The first one had wings, and for 28 years, it was not allowed to exist.